Welcome to another episode of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and I am really thrilled to be introducing you to Jennifer Bassman today. I had the pleasure of meeting Jennifer in Clubhouse. She often helps to co-mod in our rooms, and she always brings incredible value to the table, and I just knew I had to get her here to share some of those incredible insights with you. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. And for our listeners and viewers out there, today we are going to be talking about negotiating boundaries, those all important boundaries, and also negotiating past burnout. And if you don't happen to know Jennifer Bassman is a burnout and boundary expert and strategist. So you're in for some really hot tips on both of these. Go get a pad and paper and be ready to take notes. And she helps women business owners in particular find their zone of genius so that they can focus their time and energy more successfully. And she's a certified Clifton strengths coach that believes that when we know our strengths, when we can tap into those strengths, our path to happiness and success becomes a lot clearer. So you can see why I just love Jennifer as well. You know, being the founder of Women on Purpose, I'm all about tapping into those gifts, tapping into your purpose. And Jennifer is an expert at helping women do that. So why don't you kick us off, Jennifer? Tell us a little bit about how you came to be a coach on the topic of burnout and boundaries, how that became your area of expertise.
You bet. Thank you. Yeah, I burned out myself and went through this period of at least 2 years. It was very likely it was a lot longer, probably closer to 3. And the reason I can't put an exact time, peg on it is because we often don't notice when we're sliding into burnout. Yeah. It's something that seems like it's happened all of a sudden, but it actually took quite a bit of time to get us there. So I went through burnout, struggled through burnout. And discovered there just were not a lot of resources about working through and recovering from burnout.
Absolutely.
And swore to myself at one point, if I make it through this, I'm coming out of this and helping others on the other side. I will create some resources and be a resource myself for others.
That is so beautiful. And I love your insight. I think that's really important. I want to put a pin in that for everybody. This idea that we often don't recognize it when we're in it. It's that scope creep, right? It creeps up on us. It creeps up and it starts affecting. And by the time we really have an awareness of it, it's usually pretty full blown or get it on its way to getting pretty full blown. Would you agree?
It is. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And the, crux of burnout is stress. We have put ourselves through chronic stress for a long period of time from working, and our bodies get used to a certain level of stress. And that stress, just as it keeps building, we just don't notice really that it's happening until we kind of look back one day and go, oh my God, what did I just do?
Yeah. And do you find as women in particular, because we're so conditioned to be the nurturers, the caregivers, a little bit of the martyrs, right? Where we put ourselves at the bottom and take care of everybody else. And then compounding that we have to be super women, you got to be the super mom, the super career woman. So what were the factors that led you to specialize in coaching female entrepreneurs?
We are twice as likely to burn out. And a lot of that comes from, the sense of responsibility that we have to others, our natural tendency to nurture other people, as well as the societal expectations that are put upon us, that we need to be the caretakers, that we need to be the emotional rocks, that, it's like that. It goes back to that whole movie, Steel Magnolias, where they're talking about how women need, we need to be soft on the inside, but, very, very strong on the outside. And so, after kind of working through that trauma myself and thinking, this just isn't right,
Yeah.
it's turning around to other women and saying, you know what, there are a lot of unrealistic expectations that are put upon us. And it's not really a shock that a lot of us are tired, exhausted, worn out, feel like we can't really get any traction anywhere. Yeah. So, it's just kind of keeping in mind that you're not alone, that there is this expectation that we've all got to work against. So,
yeah. And how much of it, how much of it, Jennifer, do you find is internal? Like I find when we get a group of women together, even small, and for me, it was a big epiphany because I was guilty as well of that. I now talk about that. It's like that scene from Jaws, where they're sitting, showing their scars in the back and holding up. And you get women together and it's almost like we wear as a badge of honor that we don't have time for anything. Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I wouldn't have the time to indulge in that. And how
Yeah.
much of it do you find is that internal that, I mean, I know there's a lot of external conditioning that leads us to being there, but how much of it do you find is that internal piece?
I think it's at least half of it,
Yeah,
possibly more. But I mean, I don't think that internal piece would be there if that external
absolutely.
piece, was not pushing it along. I think we're just because we're naturally inclined to do something, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be heightened, so to speak,
Yeah.
by external sources pushing at us.
Yeah.
So I do think we have women tend to also, the way our brains work, the way, our biology works, we tend to be thinking about how we can do things better, how,
Yeah.
we can get more involved, how we can, nurture and keep the conversation going. We want to communicate with other people. And so we just kind of, there are things that we naturally do, and,
Yeah.
then those natural tendencies also lead to some limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome. We start comparing ourselves to other people. So yeah, we do a number
Yeah,
on ourselves.
absolutely. There's so much there that to unpack. My gosh. And
Yes.
how much do you feel is, because it's funny when we talk about that external pressure, I mean, I'm assuming some of it is in our day-to-day lives where we're getting that
Mhm.
external pressure. But I wonder how much do you find in your work as an expert and coach and strategist for women entrepreneurs, that how much of it do you find is what I would call more, generational, like some of that conditioning that comes from passed on from generation to generation, going back to some of those
Uh-huh.
limiting beliefs about the lack of rights that we had as women.
Oh, it's definitely, that definitely plays a role. There's a term called epigenetics where, basically trauma is passed down from one generation to the next. And, I know I feel it. I feel a sense of, um, guilt as well as a sense of
Mm,
responsibility to pass down to my nieces
yeah.
what was done for me by my mother and my grandparents and my great grandparents, the
Yeah.
women before me. I know here in the United States there's there are a lot of healthcare, female only healthcare issues
Yeah.
that we're currently fighting for, that my parents fought for me to have,
Yeah.
that I feel a sense of responsibility to as well. So there's definitely a role that history plays in it for all of us. And some of us just tend to feel a little more guilty about it than
Yeah.
others. But
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you talked about that elephant in the room because guilt is
yeah,
such a big influence on us and it affects us in so
huge.
many ways. And I love that you mentioned about imposter syndrome as well. What are some tips you have, or how do you help sort of some of your clients through imposter syndrome? Because I do think, generally, but women in particular often suffer from imposter syndrome and it so profoundly affects how we show up.
Yeah, and it's something that I still work through too. I kind of have the mindset of I don't think it ever 100% goes away,
Yeah.
because every time we get ourselves into a new role, every time we put ourselves in a new environment,
True.
certain things kind of keep creeping up. But I've put certain boundaries in place, had certain conversations with myself where and with my clients as well, where, we kind of make these lists of why I should be here, why I deserve to be here,
Nice.
what skills do I naturally have that require me to be here, even,
Yeah.
that tell the rest of the group why I should have a seat at that table.
Yeah.
And, and earlier in my career, when I was a lot younger, age played a huge role in imposter syndrome for me. It
Yeah.
wasn't just a knowledge thing, it wasn't just a confidence thing. It was more, I'm way too young to be at this table,
Yeah.
regardless of what I've done that got me here.
Yeah.
But now, now it's just more, am I telling people the right thing? It's
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting how it evolves, what it is that triggers, us feeling like an imposter.
Yeah. Such a great insight. And again, for our listeners out there, I really want you to focus on that because so often people who talk about imposter syndrome say, you're going to break through it and put it behind you. And I love your sort of putting a pin on this idea that, hey, this is ongoing. Every time you try something new, that's going to creep in again. And I think
Yes.
it's such a valuable tool that you've shared with us there about changing our inner dialogue around that, right? Having that tool
Yeah.
to recognize, to say, I do belong, whatever that inner negative story is. It sounds like you've trained yourself and help other women flip the story they're telling themselves in the moment when it creeps in.
Yeah, as we should. We are way too influenced by what other people think about us or what we perceive other people think
Yeah.
about us, actually.
Yeah.
Where society tells us that we should be playing versus where we actually
Yeah.
need to be playing.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we don't listen to that inner dialogue that's telling us that we shouldn't or we couldn't
Yes.
or we won't.
Yeah.
When you start hearing those words, that's when, your hackles should come up saying, I
Yes.
need to sit down and have a conversation with myself about this
Yes.
because I'm needed here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's so powerful and so timely because I was seeing a friend I hadn't seen in a while yesterday. I just got back this morning. Such an accomplished woman, right? And you're talking about that external versus internal validation. Again, as women, we
Yeah.
tend to be much more likely to seek that validation from external. What are other people thinking of us? What are other people saying of us? And half the time we've got it wrong,
Yeah.
rather than
Yes.
just owning it internally. And I mean, this is a woman who was one of the first, to have a position with a high profile law firm back when there were very few women. She was one of the first women to hold a really high level political power as a member of
Wow.
parliament. In fact, she was a minister. And we started talking about something, and she talked about the fact that she didn't feel she had accomplished much. And she wasn't fishing for a compliment. It was this genuine sense of that imposter syndrome somehow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, other women look up to you as the model, the pinnacle, and here you are doubting yourself. So let's start with boundaries. I
Yeah.
mean, we hear a lot of talk about boundaries these days. So, tell us a little bit about healthy boundaries. What are they and why are they so important? Because I'm not sure everybody recognizes, and women in particular. I think we could all use a little refresher course on why it is so important to have those boundaries.
You bet. I even give myself a refresher course, so nobody feel bad if they forget from time to time. But one of the first things I like to talk about when I talk about healthy boundaries is there's a difference between rules and boundaries. I
Mm,
think we often confuse the two. We think, we've made a boundary, but what we've actually created is a rule. But a healthy boundary has to do with yourself. It has to do with your own feelings, your own behaviors, and how you're going to manage that. It's how you're going to respond versus react to things that are going on around you. Whereas a rule is an attempt to place some standards in place for other people's behaviors. And I
okay.
think one of the hardest barriers for us to get over is the fact that we have absolutely no control over how other people think,
Yeah.
feel, and behave. And so once we can kind of get around that mindset of, what, things are going to happen. People are going to say things. People aren't going to like my boundaries. They're going to disagree with them, but I can't listen to that because I need to do what's best for me.
Yeah. That is an important mindset shift that you have just hit on there. So can you give us
Thank
a
you.
concrete, because even as you were saying that, I was having like lights go off myself here. Give us an example of that difference when you're talking about sort of the rules that we have for others versus the boundaries, which are more internal for ourselves. Can you give us an example in concrete terms so people can really get that?
You bet. You bet. Let's think about this in terms of hours of operation. A business will put on their, the front door of their business that says we're only open from the hours of 9 to 5. That's a rule. People
Yeah.
can, knock on that window. Somebody else can open the door for them. They can open early. They can make exceptions. No shoes, no shirt, no service.
Yeah.
That's another great example
Yeah.
of boundaries or rules that we put in place. You have no control who walks into your business and when. But a boundary, and this was one of the very first ones that I put in place, was a boundary around my time. Actually, putting operational hours in place for myself,
Hmm.
and saying which meant having to say to others, I can't help you right now, or I'm not answering the phone after 6 o'clock at night, or, a great easy boundary if we want an easy win is to put an out of office, alert on our email that says to people, which
Yeah.
also manages expectations. I answer emails Monday through Friday between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And that you can't control when somebody's going to send you that email, but you can control yourself and when you decide to answer it.
Oh my gosh, so good. That is a perfect
Thank you.
example. And as you're saying, and I'm sitting here going, oh, mea culpa. I preach at women on purpose of the importance of setting those boundaries. And yet I allow that scope creep myself
We
where,
all do.
yeah, and you can end up with 7 days a week with no
Yeah,
actual time with it. It slips away so quickly. So that
it
is
does.
Gorgeous example. Now,
Thank
as
you.
you know, I believe that all of life is a negotiation, and the most important negotiation is the one we have with ourselves. But a lot of people, I think, dismiss the idea of negotiating boundaries. They think it's just, the courage to say no. So I'd love you to share your thoughts on that. What is the difference about actually negotiating personal boundaries versus just, oh, this should be simple. All you got to do is say no. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will. When you say that, and I've thought about this often when we're in clubhouse rooms, my version of negotiating boundaries is having flexible boundaries. We can't have rigid boundaries. We can't just say no or expect ourselves to say no. We're human beings. We have feelings and emotions that, or people have emergencies around us. It's just when it gets to the level of somebody else's crisis is always your emergency, you know, that's questionable. We need to talk about that. But when there's the occasion that comes up that somebody had an accident, or a printer didn't get the materials printed out on time, yeah, there are going to be moments where you're going to have to kick into overdrive or do certain things at different times when you may not have been planning on doing it, or it's typically your time to yourself. And that also comes up, the negotiation part also comes up in communicating our boundaries.
Yeah.
We think that it has to be a confrontational kind of thing, where when we say no with a stern face, authority in our voice, and which is something I really have to watch out for with my facial expressions. But it's about having some communication with the other person and saying, hey, this is usually how I operate. I operate this way because, and if somebody else is coming back and saying, well, my needs are this and they're outside of what your typical boundaries are, sometimes you have to sit there and negotiate a little bit with yourself,
Yeah.
what you're willing to sacrifice, as well as with the other person, and how they can inch a little bit closer to what you need, and you can inch a little bit closer to what they need as well.
Oh, so good, Jennifer. And again, like
Thank you.
two really important points there. I want to make sure you've all got that. One, like Jennifer's talking to us about that importance of negotiating with yourself, right? When are you going to make those exceptions and what way you're going to make them? And the second piece that I think we often ignore is how you deliver the message, that communication piece. Saying no doesn't always, and I think as women, we so fear no, so fear
Oh
rejection
yes.
that we don't like giving it, but recognize, the power of a positive no, as William Ury says. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And we also need to consider that it's okay that we turn people down, because we get turned down. Like you said, we get turned down all the time. That
yeah,
no is often something we hear every day in our lives, but we didn't die, we didn't get
yeah,
destroyed, we didn't melt into a puddle and crumble.
yeah,
But one thing to also note, and something you said that, is you can think of your boundaries like pre made decisions. You've already decided what you're going to give and what you're not going to give, how far you can truly stretch yourself versus when you need to stay tight. You've decided what your response is going to be to someone that's constantly challenging maybe your hours of
yeah,
operation, or constantly challenging when you're going to answer emails. So, thinking of it that way sometimes helps us realize that we've already decided for ourselves, this is okay and this is not.
yeah. That's great. And I like when you talk about that that got me thinking as well, that you can have, when you think about this stuff with more intention, you can actually have some set answers already so that you're able to deliver them in a way that you're comfortable with, and you don't get that deer in the headlights where you end up giving away your boundaries and let it creep past. I think
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
important. And how strongly do you feel about, because this whole idea that like every time we say no to something, we're actually saying yes to something else. And the opposite is also true. If we keep saying yes and don't honor our own boundaries, we're actually saying no to ourselves for other valuable opportunities. How much do you find that in your work?
I find that to be 100% true. When we say no, we keep ourselves open for the right opportunities, for the appropriate opportunities, instead of saying yes to things that we feel obligated to, that make us feel stressed out or make us
Yeah.
feel bad. So I think there is definitely something to that. When you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to another. And when you're saying no to something, sometimes you're saying yes to something else.
Yeah. And I think
I always love that line of thought.
yeah, and I think it gives us permission a little bit more, right? That if
Mhm.
we're
It does.
recognizing that hey, we think we're doing a favor for ourselves and for others when we're saying yes, 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 but really every time
Yeah,
we're saying yes, we actually are saying no to something else. So we're
very
not
true.
being as generous as we think we are in doing that to ourselves or to others, right? So,
Very true. Very,
and
very true.
I love your book, Stop Being a Doormat. Love that title
Thank
too, by
you.
the way. And for our listeners out there, I'll make sure to have that in our show notes as well. And even for our viewers on YouTube out there, we'll make sure to give you access. So I highly encourage you go check out that book. And I know in your book, you really give people an easy method sort of for creating those boundaries and without feeling guilty, which is so important. So can you share, so without giving away your whole book, can you at least share some of your, top hot tips on how to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I talk about a lot, whether you're reading the book or you're hearing me speak on different stages, is that we need to understand what's most important and what's valuable to us. If we don't know those things, we can't really create solid boundaries. So it's important to spend some time thinking about that, why it's important to you, so that when you can connect it to something that's meaningful, you're going to be far more likely to enforce that boundary when it's challenged or when you're feeling exhausted and you just,
Yeah.
we all have those moments of, yeah, whatever. I'll do it, fine,
Yeah.
But instead, it becomes more of a natural, it's a habit to say, no, don't have time for that. Another powerful tip is to practice your boundaries.
Mhm.
People, I always get looks from people when I talk about practicing your boundaries in a mirror, but this is actually incredibly important and is going to make you far more likely to be successful in the future because you've practiced them. You've actually felt, that fear, or even just some of whatever those emotions are going to gurgle up in your body as you're saying them, and you are
Mm.
familiar with those words coming out of your mouth. When we get in intense situations where somebody's challenging us or we're upset, sometimes things will come out of our mouths that we
Yeah.
don't recognize. And so we don't, yeah, we go, did I just say that? Did I mean it that way? This is going to make it far more likely that you're going to say the right thing and you're going to mean what you say and you're going to stand behind it. You
Yeah.
won't be so nervous. It won't feel so foreign to you to say, you know what? I don't like the way you're talking to me. I don't like the way you're treating me. I need to remove myself from the situation until we can have a calm conversation.
So
And
good.
that does not feel foreign to me saying that because I've said it so many times to myself. If you have a trusted friend that you can, have these, practice sessions with so that they can tell you what your facial expressions or your
Yes.
body language looks like. For me, that was a huge challenge in practicing my boundaries because I have a poker face. You can always tell what I'm thinking. And so it doesn't, that I had to work that out of myself in certain places or in certain situations. And then you can also record yourself. We've got these phones with cameras on them, use
Nice.
them so that you can see what your face is doing, what your body is doing. You're going to sweat the first few times you do it. And kind of ratchet up, in terms of stakes. Don't go for the, big, huge kahuna boundary the first time you try and force your boundaries. Do something low stakes. Do something that doesn't have any meaningful, fallout if it doesn't go your way.
Yeah.
An example of that is sending food back at the restaurant. I know some of us
Mm.
get really nervous about that. So finding just those small opportunities where you can, really get some wins. And once you start building up on those wins, you're going to start building your confidence to try something a little bit different. And sometimes the first thing we try in terms of enforcing our boundaries, it doesn't work. Don't fret. There are
Yeah.
plenty more ways to do it. It's just finding what's comfortable and feels authentic to you.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. I mean, geez. And I love
Thank
that
you.
finding your deep why. Oh, I'm such a big believer in how important that is. And we don't do it often enough.
Agreed. We
And
don't. We don't.
can you give us a couple more, or even like I know you gave one example there for yourself, and if you want to just share that again and or a different one, whatever, about how you like practice with yourself about one that you find challenging to say and how you do that. Just give us another example of that, Jennifer. I think that was so powerful.
Oh, you bet. Yeah. So one of my biggest boundaries that I had to learn how to enforce were the boundaries around my time and communicating with people
Yeah.
what my time situation was. I have owned a pet sitting, a pet care business for 20 years, and if you know anything about pet sitting, it's kind of it's
Yeah.
24-hour a day, 7-day week
Yeah.
business, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's just
Yeah.
that some of us have made it that way too, where we don't turn our phones off, or we answer calls and text messages at crazy hours of the day. And one of the things that I was really running into that was actually causing me a lot of stress were pick up and drop off times with people. My clients would say things to me like, I'll be there at 2-ish, or I'll be there at 3-ish. And so that ish, what does
Yeah.
the ish mean? And I so I would have people that would show up at 2:30 or 3:30 or 2:45, until I actually put people in a place where they had to communicate with me what the ish actually meant. And the first time I had to do it, I was so glad it was on the phone, because I was sweating bullets. Like, sweat was coming out from everywhere, Cindy, everywhere. And I was shaking as well. And this is a she's been a long time client. We had a great relationship. And so, it lessened some of the stakes. I didn't think she would
Yeah.
get upset. She would probably be surprised because I was changing the game, or
Yes.
she was hearing something from me that she
Yeah.
hadn't typically heard, but she was totally okay with it. It didn't make it confrontational. She did her usual thing where she, said to me, "Hey, I'll be there about 2-ish, Jen. Is that okay?" And I said, "Hey, could we actually put a more definitive time on there? Can we say between 2 and 2:15?"
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, sure. That's totally fine. We'll make it
Yeah.
that. I'll be there between 2 and 2:15."
Yeah.
And she didn't get upset. She didn't question anything, and it started setting this precedent. It took a couple of times with her
Yeah.
to get rid of the ish and get
Yeah.
some, because we're making a new habit, so that wasn't unusual. But I remember hanging up the phone and going, "Oh my god, she didn't fire me. She still wanted to be my friend. We're good." And
Yeah.
it's very scary, but we've got to remember that, particularly as business owners, our clients want us to stick around. They understand that we get tired and we get exhausted. They get tired and exhausted. And they
Yeah.
can also learn a few things from us by putting some boundaries around some of the things that we do.
Yeah.
I've had some, different boundaries that I've put in place. Different clients come back and go, "I've noticed something different about you."
Oh,
Something's
that's
going
great.
on.
I love
Yeah.
that.
And they want to know what the change is and how I implemented it. And,
Yeah.
a large part of it was, having a seat with myself and saying, "Jennifer, what's important to you? What is the most important thing for you to protect?
Yeah.
And, why is it that way?" And when I realized how deeply emotionally how deeply emotional I felt about my time, that it's such a scarcity in terms, or
Yeah.
finite, because I can't create more of it.
Yeah.
That's where I realized where my anger and resentment was coming from, about people wasting my time.
Yeah.
And so, it made it a lot easier to start saying to people, "You know what? I have this time available, or I have this time available,
Yeah.
or can we, put a little bit of a buffer on that with, I'll
Yeah.
give you 15 minutes to deal with traffic, or,
Yeah.
can you at least start calling me
Yes.
when something,
It's so good.
needs to change."
Yeah.
So, and it was a huge wake up call to also to what a doormat I had become to all the
Uh,
people in my life, and a lot of the behavior that I allowed to take place.
yeah.
Like, while I've said we can't control how other people behave, we can control the way,
Yeah.
what we allow in, and
Yeah.
the things that come at us. So
And that's a great point about, because when people are used to us being a particular way and that starts to become the norm, I gather that there may be some pushback, and that's okay too, right? That's why it's
yeah,
important to be so solid.
yeah,
And I love this idea of recording yourself and practicing, because as you were saying it, I remember the first few times when I saw myself on video, and when I'm feeling passionate about something, my face can look so intense. And I'm like,
yes,
oh my gosh. So
yes.
what was your bugaboo? What was the thing that you found most surprising about either your facial expression or body language?
Oh my gosh, I hope I can say this on your show. I have what's called resting bitch face, and which means I get very, like, my whole face kind of starts to squish in. And it's largely because I'm thinking about something. I'm not
Yeah,
mad, I'm not upset. That's just my thinking face. I think we've all
yeah,
got a thinking face of some
so good.
sort. But yeah, that was employees for a long time would be, "Are you mad?" And I'm like, "No, why would you think that I'm mad?" Because
Yeah,
that terminology wasn't around. You just look upset. And now that that terminology is in our vernacular, I can go, "Oh, I know what they're talking about now."
yeah, so
And
good.
we don't realize we do stuff like that. And
Yeah,
that was also, I've started doing TikToks, and that it's really fascinating to look back and watch video when you think that your face is opened up and you think you're putting on some else, you look a certain way, and then you go
yeah.
back and the voice doesn't match the face, the
Yeah,
face doesn't match the voice.
yeah,
And it's very awkward. And I forgot that I didn't answer that part of your question. I'm sorry. But yeah, having to practice that, don't think that you're weird for not having experience with it.
yeah,
It's We don't practice our interactions
yeah,
with people. It's something we've just done naturally for a long time, and we really haven't thought about how
yeah,
our facial expressions or the social cues that we've got or
yeah,
we make, affect other people. And that was huge for me, just going, "Oh, wow, that's why certain people react
yeah.
to me that way in a department store. I must look angry."
Such a simple thing,
Got
but
it.
so
Yeah.
powerful and so easy to fix, which is great news for
Yes.
everybody out there. So
Yeah.
let's shift gears and chat a bit about burnout. And
You
again,
bet.
we're hearing a lot more about burnout today. And I'm interested in your perspective. Are we just talking about it more, raising our awareness, do you think, Jennifer, or is it actually more prevalent now? And if so, why?
Yeah, it is more prevalent, and we are talking about it more, thank goodness.
Yeah,
When I first was burned out, I had no idea what that was. I didn't even
yeah,
know that was what was happening to me. It took coming across a random article on the internet to find out that that's actually what was happening with me.
wow.
Because at the time, I was like, I don't feel depressed. I don't, because you go online and Dr. Google gives you all the typical symptoms of depression, but they didn't all check the box. And
Yeah,
depression and burnout are so closely aligned, that you start to kind of ask yourself some
yeah,
questions. But burnout, yeah, we have been in a global pandemic for 2 going on 3 years now, which
right.
means that we have been under constant
Yeah,
stress, and our bodies and our brains were not meant
yeah,
to handle more than about 3 minutes worth of stress at a
yeah,
time. So it's not really a shock that more people are starting to feel that squeeze. They're starting to feel that pressure, and one of the symptoms, or one of the emotions that people often describe with burnout is they feel trapped.
yeah,
And a lot of us are feeling very, very trapped right
yes,
now,
yeah,
by the things that are happening. And there's all this decision fatigue.
yes,
I was just talking to my husband about this earlier. I was listening to a clubhouse room on grief. And, they were talking a little bit about decision fatigue and how that plays into stress. And, we're having to make these decisions on a daily basis that, we just never have in our entire lives because of the cultures that we live in. Is going to the grocery store going to kill me?
yeah,
Is
yeah.
a little stressful
Yeah.
for people. Cool. But
Yeah.
yeah, burnout is, it's a huge topic, and it should be a huge topic. It's something that we should all be aware of, especially if you own a business and you're managing employees. Be aware of what your employees might be feeling right
Yeah.
now. That they're going to need some, not TLC necessarily, but
Yeah.
maybe just a little bit
Yeah.
more room,
Yeah.
because they may be feeling the walls close in. I know a lot of companies are having trouble hiring right now. And so
Yes.
some employees are having to take on more than they typically might.
Yeah.
So there's, just some awareness that as managers, as business owners, that we need to have, for the safety of our own employees, but also, for ourselves, what boundaries are we putting in place so
Mhm.
that we can manage our stress,
Yeah.
a little bit better.
Oh, as a labor lawyer, that's something I know a thing or two about. I mean, it is. And
Oh, I
and I want
bet.
to really thank you for speaking into the COVID situation because I think
You bet.
we got a lot of putting a head in the sand. I think it's so important to recognize for people to give yourself permission to recognize there is global grief out there that we're
Yes,
experiencing, and recognizing the impact. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're
not at
not
all.
able to cope or that you ought to be embarrassed about it. And speaking about it, and speaking to that elephant in the room is so important. So thank you for that. And
Absolutely.
let's bust some myths about it. So what are some misconceptions about burnout, sort of either burnout prevention or burnout recovery?
Well, I think one of the biggest myths is that it can't happen to, it only happens to
Uh,
people that are overachievers or high achievers. Yeah, they are more prone to it. But it can happen to any one of us at any time. Just, as a reminder, a basic definition of burnout is chronic stress over long periods of time due to work.
mm.
And it's, yeah, it's, not just a, hey, I worked 75 hours a week thing. It's, how much are you allowing, how much are you balancing the intense, moments of work with, hey, I'm going to take a break. How much time off are you scheduling for yourself? How much thinking space are you giving for yourself? That's one that really surprised me when I started coaching people going through burnout, when they started talking about not having enough time or space to think. They
Yeah,
weren't able to really go through a full thinking cycle, whatever that meant for
yeah,
them. And so they felt like they were making a lot of random decisions, or making decisions without having the time to really sit with it, sit with the information.
yeah.
And I think most people recognize they're not always going to get all the information or all the time that they need to make a decision. But, there are certain people that in the Clifton Strengths world, we call strategic thinkers, that tend to need that time.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
knowing that about yourself is huge. It's a huge thing to be aware of and make some room for.
Mm.
Um, the I'm trying to, let's see, some other misconceptions might be that it's always the job.
Ah,
This one is a huge one. People always want to blame their job. They always want to blame a
true.
boss. They always want to blame a coworker,
That is true.
or somebody else.
Yeah.
And I am a shining example of that. I am putting myself out there that that was something I thought for a very long time. It was my
Yeah.
company, this damn job, all these clients, my
Yeah.
employees. And it was really something that was inside of me that was actually the problem.
Mm.
I had this insane sense of responsibility and this over the top, unrealistic these over the top unrealistic expectations for myself and for other people.
Yeah.
And so, my standards were like way up here, whereas like
Yeah.
the average person standards were right here.
Yeah.
And so operating at this level 24/7,
Oh,
365 days a year, yeah, eventually I was going to blow. And
yes.
so, that wasn't anybody else's fault. That wasn't anybody saying to me, you have to, or you should. That was me having this, woulda, shoulda, coulda mindset, worrying too
Yeah.
much about what other people were going to think. There were some perfectionism tendencies in there. A lot of people pleasing was
Yes.
part of that recipe. And so we need to start looking at some of that. It can be the job, it can be the boss,
Sure.
but we need to start taking some accountability for some of the things we do or we don't do that cause us to go into burnout mode.
That is such a great awareness raiser on so many levels, right? One, that
Yeah.
recognizing the internal role that we play,
Yeah.
and owning it. But also, I want to circle back because you'd said it earlier, and you just really touched on it again. This idea that our bodies are not equipped to stay in that adrenal overload for long periods of time, and when we push
They are not.
ourselves so far, we stay in a constant state of adrenal overload, and it causes physical as well as emotional, and it affects your relationships, every aspect of
It
your
sure
life.
does.
Oh,
It
so
sure does.
important. So what are some of
Yeah.
your tips on how can we negotiate past burnout, Jennifer?
Having some of these honest conversations with yourself is one. Definitely taking a step back and going, oh wow, okay, what am I doing to contribute to this
Yeah.
situation? Am I doing what all I can to say no? Am I doing all I can to communicate with other people and really, make it a situation where it's, am I adding stress, or am I taking
Yeah.
just kind of thinking about your role and what's, playing out right in front of
Yeah.
you. The second thing I would really recommend is the Clifton Strengths Assessment. I know I mentioned it earlier, but Clifton Strengths, it used to be called Strengths Finder, so some people might recognize it as
Okay.
that. but that assessment actually gives you this report back that tells you what your natural strengths and talents are.
Cool.
That was my trigger to figuring out, one, I was burned out, and two, what was burning me out.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we can't always put our thumb, put our finger on whatever it is,
Yeah.
where what we keep doing. And that opened my eyes to the fact there's a strength called responsibility. And that is in what they call my top 5, which means that is definitely a natural talent for me,
Yeah.
something I exhibit every day.
Yeah.
And I was using it for bad instead of for good.
Oh, that.
And we call that balcony or basement behavior. And I was living in the basement of that strength. I wasn't using it well. And it was really, I mean, the second that I wish there was a camera that could have like been there in this moment when I read that report in my email, because I literally just immediately started crying. I mean, it was just
Oh,
so relieved to see, finally see what was going on. And so I use that assessment with my clients all the time, to help us figure out what it is that they're doing or they're not doing, where they might be living in their behavior, because it identifies so many things about not only our personalities, but our work ethic, our limiting beliefs, how we feel about the job that we're doing. The other thing that assessment taught me was that I was in a job where I was spending 80% of my time in my weakness zone at the
oh,
bottom
wow.
of what they consider that report.
Yeah.
I spent 80% of my day doing stuff I was not good at and I was never going to be good at.
Oh,
That was another ingredient for my recipe for burnout. And, you just look at that and you go, oh, no wonder I hated my job.
yes.
And, that's where I say we always blame the job, but what are we doing and what aren't we doing to kind of contribute to some of that? Because, the company hired you for a job they thought you'd like, you're telling them that that's what you want to do. So, we kind of have to take a little bit of that accountability. And for me to see that was so striking. And I did, as a business owner at the time, I had that power to do something about it.
Yeah.
It got a little expensive because I had to start delegating and hiring some people to do the
Yeah.
things that I shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening is that I was happier. I was a lot
Oh,
more confident. I was a lot less stressed. And I
yes.
started making more money than I knew what to do with at the
Exactly.
time.
Oh, I am so glad you've talked about that because we often don't, if we stay in our unique zone of genius or in our
Yes.
unique gift and tap into that thing that fills us with purpose and when we feel most on purpose, we are going to
Yeah.
go so much further. And delegating, automate, delegate, or eliminate those things on your list that aren't your highest power, that aren't your
Yeah.
gift. And people are worried that it's a waste of money, but you will make more money. You will free up more time to stay in your zone of genius. And
Yes.
the other thing you said that really resonated with me is this idea about the shadow side of these things. I hadn't really thought of it that way before, Jennifer. When you said like responsibility, that's a strength. And, we can do that in ways, we can bring that strength to the table in ways that are productive, bring into the light, if you will. But there's a shadow side to a lot of these strengths that we have that can be
Mhm.
really counterproductive. That was a huge
Yeah.
insight for me.
If we have a second, I want to talk about that because
Yeah.
that is a big thing. I coach a lot of achievers. That turns out that's a strength, and that is the most common strength among people, in America and
Yeah.
the United States and in Canada.
Yeah.
That is the top strength that comes up, male or female. And it's really interesting. I'm also married to a number one achiever,
Yeah.
and they fascinate me because
Yeah.
that's at the bottom. That is totally towards the bottom.
Yeah.
It's not at the top for me. And achievers have this need, and we can go ahead and put overachievers in this, little dish that we're talking about. But achiever and overachievers, they don't know when to quit.
Yeah.
They do, but they don't, and they get into this trouble of thinking that they have to do all the things
Oh,
before they can rest.
yeah.
And so they go, 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 but then they keep finding more things that need to get done.
Yes.
And it's so interesting because, while we push and push and push in our societies right now, we like this busy culture. We like this hustle culture. Look at all these people moving and shaking and making money and getting things done and being productive.
Yeah.
Well, it's got a price. It's got a cost. And
Yeah.
it's that what you're talking about, that shadow behavior, that starts coming
Yeah.
up. We start to see a lot of anger and resentment with achievers. They start forming a lot of really weird sleep patterns if they even sleep.
Mhm. Yes.
There are a lot of dark sides to this. And one of the things that I know I've really worked with a lot of achievers on is figuring out what they can actually handle in a day. Like
Yeah.
literally, we sit down to the minute and figure out
That's so
what
good.
it is that they could really accomplish in one day. Because
Yeah.
what happens with achievers, and I've seen this with my husband, is they won't go to bed till they can finish their list. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter that other things were added into that list and it's
Yes.
impossible to get it done in
Yes.
24 hours. It's that I have to get that list done or it keeps
Yeah.
them up at night. And
Yeah.
so we have to figure out, how we can make a list that still makes them feel productive, still makes them feel accomplished. But in all honesty, for a lot of achievers, it's that being able to check that thing off the list that
Yeah.
really matters. It doesn't matter if it's sweeping the floor or it's finishing a global project for some conglomerate. The check mark is all that matters. And so we figure out how to create a task list that is for, maybe a 6-hour day, because inevitably, depending on the way they work, other things are going to get added throughout the day that maybe
Yeah.
now that they have a 6-hour list,
Yeah.
it only pushes it to a true 8.
Yeah.
So, being reasonable with how much time and how much energy you actually have within a day. And then the second conversation achievers really need to have with themselves is not giving 100% to their job.
Yeah.
And they have other things throughout the day that they need to do, like working out, spending time with family.
Yeah.
So making sure that they're only giving maybe 60 or 70% to that,
Yeah.
and they allot 20 to 30% to those other things that they want to get done.
So good. And just to clarify on that, you're not saying that while you're in the job, you're only showing up at 60%. You're saying
Yeah.
recognize you got a whole life and you
Yeah.
need
You
to
got,
save some of the room for some of
yes.
the other
Yes.
priorities in your life. I love that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the
Because we
other
go,
thing that really struck me as you're saying that, Jennifer, too, is this idea. Not only is it that you're not sleeping and you're doing too much because you feel you got to fit that all in the day, but when you set these unachievable expectations for yourself, you're constantly feeling like a failure at some level, which makes you strive even more. And you
absolutely.
end up in this striver, driver, achiever that where it'll never be enough because you just keep setting higher expectations and feel
Ding, ding,
perpetually
ding.
like you're failing. Oh, that's so
Yeah.
good. So good.
Yeah.
Now, can you recover from burnout while you're like still working or doing whatever, or do you need to take time off? I've heard that debate before. I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, there's some myths around that, and there's still, yes, you can definitely recover. It's going to be a little bit trickier. And the thing about burnout recovery that is so tough is that it's different for everybody, and your solution is going to be a combination of tactics. It's not just going to be getting more sleep. It's not just going to be eating better. It's not just going to be adding exercise. It's going to be some time management. It's going to be taking some vacation. It's going to be maybe changing some of your job responsibilities.
Yeah.
We have to sit down and figure out what that combination of things is going to be that's actually going to help you recover.
Mhm.
And I'm working with somebody right now who's trying to recover from burnout, and she's still in a job. She's still in her role. And the first question that we had to answer is, do I even want this job?
Yes.
Do I want to stay here?
Yeah.
Because some of us are trying to hold on to a job we don't even want.
Yeah. Yes.
So that tells us right there that, okay, she's probably going to need to stay, working in her job while, okay, is this the right job for her? Obviously we've gone down all those paths. Is this the right job?
Yeah.
Does this call to your natural talents and strengths? So we've had those conversations, but, then we identified things about the job itself or what she's doing in that particular job that might be stressing her out. And that sometimes that's going to, if she can't change some of those things on her own, it's having a conversation with her direct boss,
Yeah.
her immediate supervisor. Or if you're a business owner, that's having a conversation with yourself or your board or, whoever it is that you kind of have that brain trust with and saying, all right, what can I delegate? Can I switch
Yes.
some tasks with some people? I remember being in a job where there were certain things I absolutely hated doing. And one of my coworkers loved the things I
Yeah.
hated, but I loved the things she hated. And so
Yeah.
we ended up
Nice.
swapping tasks.
Yeah.
And our boss didn't care as long as everything got done.
Yeah.
Who cares who actually did it? And that was for her was like a huge light bulb moment of I could, there are
Yeah.
a couple of things that I really hate doing that,
Yeah.
one of my colleagues really doesn't mind. One of them being speaking in front of people. Her colleague loves it.
Yeah.
She hates it. And so she's, I haven't heard back from her how this turned out, but she was like, "Oh my God, I don't think she'd have any problem getting more
Yeah.
time in the spotlight." And I don't really mind putting together all the PowerPoint presentations that we have
Wow.
to do. And I really don't care standing up on stage behind her with a stupid smile on my face. I don't want to be the one talking. I
Yeah.
don't want to be the one answering questions. And so that was like a huge revelation to her of, oh my God, she'd be more than happy to do that. I'm sure of it. And so
Yeah.
she didn't even need any guidance on having the
Yeah.
conversation. It was just that of somebody saying, you don't have to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
So if you can identify some things like that, and having a conversation with your manager, maybe you've taken recent years, of all these, companies have kind of merged or, lost employees, and we all just kind of suck up different, tasks and roles without thinking about it. Think about, what your original job description is versus what you are doing right now.
Yeah.
Are there some things that maybe you shouldn't be doing? And it's time to have that discussion with somebody of, this needs to be somebody else's responsibility. I've done it long enough. I'm happy to train somebody else to do it, but I'm done. I can't,
Yeah.
continue to perform this
Yeah.
way. It's affecting my performance. It's stressing me out. I need to move on.
Yeah.
Just having some type of conversation along those lines helps out a lot in terms of trying to recover, because you're starting to take some of the stress off your plate. You're having some small wins, which also builds your confidence.
Yeah.
And, it's also, like we've been talking about all along in this burnout conversation, looking at your own behavior. What have you
Yeah.
said yes to that you should have been saying no to? What
Yeah.
have you been saying no to that maybe you
Yeah.
should have said yes to? Do you have some, connections at work? You don't have to be best friends with people at work, but is there somebody that you
Yeah.
can form a bond or a connection with, so that you can find that support? That
Yeah.
is one thing that I think we heavily discount, particularly in this time where we're working
Yes.
from home. We aren't
Yes.
physically in offices next to people.
So true.
How can you find that bond with somebody? And I'm going to use my husband again. He has always worked for companies where he's been working from home, and so I asked him a long time ago. I was like, "So do you have any coworkers that like you can joke around with, that you built
Yeah.
some rapport, or, some relationships with?" And he just kind of was like, "Yeah." He has his version of the work wife.
Yeah.
That they I hear him on the phone talking about other coworkers and
Yeah.
gossiping or, complaining about things. But, having that support is huge. There have been
Yeah.
times when he hasn't had that person. And, I've noticed a difference in him,
Yeah.
when he didn't have that support. It's one thing to talk to me about it, but I
Yeah.
don't understand half of what he does. I'm not technical. I don't understand computers, and I don't understand, like that
Yeah.
language just,
Yeah.
so I get how it's different talking to me, and my eyes are crossing and I've got this blank
Of
look on
course.
my face like,
Yeah.
sorry,
You know what's
so
so
finding
beautiful?
that support.
I think the thing that's so beautiful about this, and it's funny, I can't believe how fast our time has gone here. It's been amazing. I'm gonna have to get
Oh
you
my
back
gosh. Yeah.
to do a follow-up. Like there's
Yes.
just so much packed in here.
I
And I was
bet.
gonna ask you about negotiating yours because I know you do a lot of animal rights advocacy, but we'll have to save that for as a little teaser for another time. Um,
Anytime.
but the
Anytime.
thing that I think so beautiful is that I'm really starting to see now, and for our listeners out there, how you've got the burnout and the boundaries tie together, right? That some of the solution for
Yes.
the burnout is the setting these healthy boundaries and not getting your identity so tied and being able to automate, eliminate, delegate, and bring purpose to your task. Find ways to bring the purpose to the work. Because I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm burned out here, I need to leave. When really it's sounding like they can tweak what they're doing and find ways to bring more purpose to their job, find ways to
Absolutely.
get rid of the pieces that are causing them undue stress. I think that's so beautiful.
Absolutely.
I love
Thank
that. Well,
you.
God, Jennifer,
Yeah.
thank you. So many gold nuggets here for everybody out
Thank
there.
you.
I invite you to re-listen to this episode, and I'm going to let you know how to check out and find Jennifer as well. But I normally end, Jennifer, I'd love to hear if you can share with us one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life. Doesn't have to be about this area, just it can be on anything. What's one of those mindset shifts that you've had that was an
Oh,
aha
wow.
moment for you?
Um, oh, wow. A mindset. Wow. I really do think it was my unrealistic expectations,
Mm,
how powerful those can be. And I mean, I just never had considered them even a
yes.
mindset, or
Yeah.
something that could even work on the level of a limiting belief. It, I just thought expectations were standards that we all
Yeah.
had to uphold. And I understood that we all had different ones. But I think when I really understood what was unrealistic, it was so powerful for me,
Yeah.
because it allowed me to let go of so many
Yeah.
things, so much sadness, anger, disappointment, resentment that I had been holding on to for
Yeah.
so long. It just was this, it's like a balloon that deflated, um, because I just didn't realize how significant that was to how I operated and how I think about things.
Yeah.
So unrealistic expectations are pretty big.
Powerful.
That was a
And I
pretty
think
big.
we're all guilty of that. So that's a great note
Yeah.
to end on. And I understand you've
Yeah.
got a free gift or resource for our listeners out there, 7 solutions to social media burnout. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes.
And for our listeners, I'll make sure that you've got the link to that in our show notes as well so that you can access that. But tell us just quickly about that, Jennifer.
You bet. This came from my own experience of getting overwhelmed with creating content for all the social media channels, as well
Yeah.
as being involved in Clubhouse. We talked about this at the very
Yes.
beginning. We're like, oh my God, how do I manage all of this? It started to get very overwhelming for me, and I know that it gets that way for other people. And the guide, I tried to write it so it went two ways: for people that are just using social media and people that are also creating content,
Yeah.
for social media as well. And just real, there are 7 different ideas, 7 different ways that you can actually kind of take a step back from social media, maybe even create less while doing more,
Nice.
and also kind of dispelling some notions and some myths in there about how we need to operate within, the social media parameters, about concept that we need to be in all the places all of the time.
Yes.
I think that's what gets to a lot of us
Yeah.
is, some FOMO, as well as this, I need to be on all the
So true.
platforms doing all the things. So
So
that
good.
one's a near and dear one to my heart.
Well, everybody make sure to take advantage of that offer. So check it out. We'll put the link in. And again, make sure to check out Jennifer's book. And Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. You've really just shared some absolute gems for everybody that are practical, easy takeaway steps to help negotiate a better life and negotiate past burnout and be able to negotiate those all important boundaries. So thanks so much for being here.
Cindy, thank you so much for having me. And I loved getting to chat with you in person. And
Yeah.
thank you to everybody in the audience today. Thank you for your time.
And for everybody out there, make sure if you want to learn more about Jennifer, really encourage you to go check her out. Check out at her website at jenniferbassman.com. So that's Jennifer Bassman, Bassman.com. And on Facebook as well, you can check out her group in at Jennifer Bassman as well. And as I say, we'll have the link to the book and the link to that free gift resource as well. And I am sure you have all got just tons of value from this episode. And make sure if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do. And also share it with anyone else that you think could get some value from the message. This episode in particular, and the podcast generally. If you know people who you want to help negotiate a better life, this is the place to do it. And make sure to join our Women on Purpose community as well if you haven't done that in Facebook at Women on Purpose community under their groups. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Take care.